Unions are uniting behind one specific mission, and that is to address our region's alarming public safety crisis that is impacting every one of us. We all know that violent crime in Seattle and specifically is at an alarming historical level. Just recently we've had 2 homicides, multiple shootings, and one 15-year-old boy was shot and killed. And as Mayor Harrell was conducting his press conference a little over an hour ago, we had a person stabbed at 4th Avenue and Pike Street. In response to this public safety crisis, our officers, along with this union, have created the Seattle Public Safety Index. And what that index does, it highlights this alarming crime wave impacting not only the community that we proudly serve, but it impacts the men and women conducting the job of policing in this city. The Public Safety Index considers the number of deployable officers, the relative crime stats, historical trends, and polling of Seattle residents in each precinct. We do this out of a possible 100 points, and currently today the index is at 30, which is not good. We can safely say that the experiment of defunding the police has failed miserably. The current state of Seattle and King County's Public Safety Index is a direct result of poor leadership by our elected officials. They led us to this point by embracing dangerous policies demanded by the fringe activist groups. I applaud Mayor Harrell, his ambition to resolve this public safety crisis. Recently, he just committed to hiring enough qualified officers in order to meet the minimum number of officers needed to adequately police our community with 1,400. I can tell you right now, we are at 880 deployable officers. We've lost 500 in 2 years. Earlier today, he announced a plan to work collaboratively with federal law enforcement officials to help curb Seattle's surge in violent crime. Please note that when I suggested the same course in 2020, I was made a pariah and categorized as a voice of the far right. Nothing could be further from the truth. Public safety should come before politics. It will take strong, focused leadership to reverse the violent trends in Seattle and King County. Someone who is willing to stand up to the unreasonable voices that protect criminals and return the public safety back to our communities. That is why I enthusiastically endorse Jim Farrell for King County prosecuting attorney. Jim's track record as mayor of Federal Way and as a senior deputy prosecutor, where he advocated for victims and for everyone's public safety concerns outside of politics, is the reason why law enforcement within Seattle and King County are united in support of Jim Farrell. It's time to remove politics out of public safety, and Jim will be able to do that. Jim.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. And I'd like to thank, and thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the men and women of law enforcement who protect and serve each one of us every day. And when you really think about it, they do so much in regard to not just protecting, but serve, the service that they provide every day. But what we are really facing right now, especially with the homicides that have occurred in downtown Seattle, the same location, 2 homicides in the past few days, another stabbing this morning, and just repeated serious violence in our community. We have an epidemic of violence in our region that must be addressed. And the solution is not to close sections of the King County Jail. The solution is not to not refer people for criminal charges and empty our jails. The solution is centered on accountability. I'm honored to have the endorsement of the Seattle Police Officers Guild and the Police Officers Guild, and the 1,500 officers essentially that represents. But what we need to do is a sea change in regard to law enforcement and how we approach this. But I think we all know it's not just about locking people up. That's where the service comes in. It's about allowing people the opportunity to course correct, especially young people. But where there is violence, where there are homicides, where there are violent people preying on the good citizens and the good residents of Seattle, King County, and all of the communities in our region, we need to be able to appropriately address those and hold offenders accountable. So diversions are a critically important part of the criminal justice system, but they must be centered on accountability. Looking the other way and pretending like it's not happening is not a solution. And ultimately, you're not even doing the offenders any kind of benefits as well. You have to allow people to course correct. During the time I was at the King County Prosecutor's Office, I was fortunate to be hired by the legendary Norm Mailing, and served 16 years as a King County prosecutor, and earned the rank of senior deputy prosecutor. I led the domestic violence court unit. I served in nearly every unit in that office. I literally had hundreds of jury trials. But what I can tell you right now is we have a public safety crisis that must be addressed. And I believe, and now with the support of law enforcement and my partners here, and really a broad bipartisan coalition of labor and business and Democrats and Republicans. I mean, I think Mike's really hit the nail on the head. This isn't about politics. It's about public safety, and it's something that we can all agree on. So I've been mayor. Now I was just elected to my third term. I've been mayor for 8 years, and I've supervised a police force for the past 8+ years. I get the phone calls in the middle of the night. And I can tell you, to claim that somehow or another crime is down or juvenile crime is down is not connected to reality. What is occurring is an explosion of violent crime in our region, and it must be addressed head on. So I would love to take some questions if you have any, and I can tell you that this is going to be a vigorous campaign. We are going to reach out to everybody in this county and talk about the issues that matter, which is making sure that people are not just feel safe, but are in fact safe. And when I talk about, maybe when friends or associates, when I say, hey, let's meet around Green Lake, let's go walk around Green Lake, people don't feel safe to walk the streets of this community. And that is a problem. And that will change when I'm the King County prosecutor. Can I answer any questions?
So what do you think are the root causes of the violent crime that we're seeing right now?
Well, I think actually, good intentions have gone awry with regard to essentially what has been the de facto legalization of drugs. I can tell you in Federal Way, we've had serious incidents of violence that has erupted as a result of essentially the trafficking of low-level narcotics in the area. And, it's created its own, in Seattle, you've got your open-air drug market around Jackson, and where it's occurring in broad daylight. That is a breakdown of really not just society, but societal norms. So I think that's one piece of it. I also think that there's been a fundamental drift away from holding offenders accountable. I'm very disappointed. I served in that office for 16 years, left 8 years ago. And when you don't hold people accountable for property crimes, residential burglary, car theft, those kinds of things, that criminal escalation, that criminal activity escalates. And I think that people are pushing, the offenders are pushing to the point of resistance. When there is no resistance, it gets more violent. And so you've got that kind of drug activity, gang activity, when there are no consequences, and when people are not being held to account and being held in custody, you see that escalation of violence, and you've got to reverse that. Closing sections of the King County Jail is alarming. And in fact, actually, when we sat down and met with the county executive and the county prosecutor and their senior staffs, and that was myself, the mayors of Kent, Renton, and Auburn, back in December, we learned about a diversion program in which people were not even going to be charged with criminal offenses that included car theft, bringing a gun to school, robbery, felony assault, felony harassment. And it was mystifying. I mean, where we met and the South King County mayors, of which I have received the unanimous endorsement of almost every community in South King County and now East King County, I can tell you that there's alarm out in the county about the direction that law enforcement and the prosecution is going. I also can tell you that the so-called reforms that were passed last year, especially with regard to pursuits and the drug laws, went too far. We've had, at least in the city of Federal Way, at least 100 incidents of times in which we knew that the person that was being pursued was guilty of an offense, but because it didn't rise at that moment in time to a probable cause level, we literally had to let them go. Now, what that does is emboldens people that are committing these offenses and actually makes it less safe. So people routinely now will run from the police when that wasn't the case before. So I've been testifying in Olympia, but I can tell you what Norm Mailing, the legendary prosecutor, he used to be a presence in Olympia and led on these issues. The current prosecutor has allowed the things to deteriorate, not just in regard to public safety, but in regard to the direction that our laws in Olympia have. And you need that being the King County prosecutor is akin to being an attorney general for a mid-sized state. If we were a state, we'd probably be the 35th, 36th largest state in the country. And so the King County prosecutor is the chief law enforcement officer for King County. And we need a prosecutor that acts like that and that leads and that shows that a commitment to public safety.
Mayor, the prosecutor's office continues to charge cases, but there are times where the judge will ultimately lower the bail or at times let the suspect go. How do you work around that?
Well, judicial independence is obviously a critical part of the entire system. I think actually what's been occurring, and I led a coalition of South King County mayors for the past several years addressing these issues. There's something called the filing and disposition standards. They're called FADs. And what has occurred is they keep increasing the level of what makes something a felony, and they're pushing it back down to the city. So no, we've seen a dramatic departure in the past few years from the number of cases that the King County prosecutor has filed. And that's caused concern and frustration. But you're right, judges on occasion, will reduce bail. But I think that the prosecutors need to step up and still insist that not only are the suspects held for bail, but there's change in circumstances as well. You can ask for increases in bail if there's what's called a change in circumstance. And so when somebody is out on bail or is one of these diversion programs, if they commit another violent offense, if they're interfering with the administration of justice, you can go back to the judge and ask for increase in bail. But you've got to make sure that you keep at it and keep asking. The problem that I see right now is there's only 2 tables in a courtroom, and our current prosecutor wants to sit at both tables. You have to pick a table. There's a prosecution table and there's a defense table, and there's been such a focus on restorative practices that we have forgot what should be the center of the justice system, which is accountability and justice for the victims. Justice is not only due to the accused, but it's due to the accuser as well, and that's what's been critically missing.
Will you still weave in that restorative justice process?
Absolutely. You've got to have a pathway, especially for young people and all people when they make mistakes. We have all made mistakes. You've got to have restorative practices. However, you cannot have situations in which people are committing burglaries, threats to kill, felony assaults, and they don't even get a case number. And what's going on right now is when they don't get a case number and they're referred to these private groups, there is no check back in. And you were talking about judges before. What's missing critically from the current RCP program with the juveniles is no judicial involvement at all. In fact, the judges, in large part, don't even know what that program is. So there's no check back. There's absolutely no idea. Did the person show up? Did they do what they were required to do? Did they even meet with anybody? You know why? There's no case number. There's no judge. And there's no eventual dismissal. I was actually the very first leader of domestic violence court in June 1st of 2000, 22 years ago now. And one of the things that was critical is allowing people to, take account for the mistakes that they've made, be held accountable, have conditions, whether it's domestic violence batterers treatment, pay the fine, have no criminal law violations. But what every one of those offenders had to do is come back before a court, a judicial officer, and say, yes, you did complete this, or no, you didn't. And that's what's missing, accountability.
Mayor, you are clearly against defunding the police department.
That's right.
But what reforms do you believe still need to be done?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the things that I think that we need to have uniformity in regard to making sure there's absolutely, no vascular restraints. In fact, the Seattle Police Department led the charge on that years ago. Under my direction as mayor, I directed our police chief to terminate all neck restraints for the safety of suspects. But I also think that the technology that we have in regard to body-worn cameras, making sure that's uniform, making sure that there's funding to make sure, because there is a cost associated with it. I think there's a lot of accountability built into the system. Initiative 940 builds that in to make sure you've got transparent and independent investigations. But I think we need to continue to look for ways to make sure that all of us are held accountable, especially officers. They have tremendous authority, but we've got to make sure that we don't have situations in which the authority of officers is so undermined that it actually encourages criminal activity. You had a question?
Yes, obviously, jail alone won't solve drug and mental health problems, so how will you make sure that the people who are going to jail for their crimes are also getting the services that they need to get their lives back on track, the housing, the rehab, the mental health counseling?
That's right. It's really about checking back in, and we can't. And I think right now some of the systems are just rooted in just looking the other way, not holding people accountable, not booking them. And I think for the violent crime, there's a standard in the criminal practice and the criminal rules that people should only be held if they're a danger to the public or interference with the administration of justice. But you've got to make sure that there's check back ins, that there's a judicial officer, and I think that's really what's missing in this process, is that you're not helping people by just not filing it, not referring it, and never checking back in to make sure compliance is made. So, and I think we've got to make sure that there are resources there. A lot of what's going on in the criminal justice system is drug and alcohol related. And so we need to make sure there's resources that they get that treatment, but that they follow through. Sometimes the most important thing that can happen to an individual is to be held accountable, and then they get back and allow their lives to course correct. Did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I'm a little confused. So the diversion programs, are you talking about adults or juveniles? Because we've got
That's a great question.
lots of, federal and state law
Yeah.
that recognizes that juveniles are not just mini adults. Norm Mailing set up one of the first drug courts
Right.
in the country.
Right.
That's been a model.
Right.
And so, there's been this recognition. And then you've got decisions like the Blake decision.
Right.
That, and that's not up to the legislature necessarily. I mean, they tried to fix it.
It would have taken. Oh, go ahead, finish.
I'm just a little confused as to when you're talking about people not being held accountable.
Right.
Are we talking about juveniles in the diversion programs, or are you talking about this new diversion program for younger adults that's being proposed but hasn't been rolled out?
Okay, great questions. Let me address them individually. So in Blake decision, the legislature could have simply added one word to fix the drug laws. And so all they would have had to do is add one law, which was the word knowingly. So Blake presented, and I talked to our legislators and I talked to many legislators, they only need to add one word. So Blake wasn't some insurmountable mountain that was then presented to the legislature to fix. One word. And then they can talk about how they address that. What I'm talking about right now, and we're talking specifically about the juvenile program RCP, Restorative Community Pathways. And what we have now been informed by the King County prosecutor, and by we, I mean the cities in King County, is that they do now plan to extend that to adults. It's not just juveniles. Now, that program was initiated with zero notice. I mean, zero notice to the cities and the people of King County before it was implemented. We found out about it when it was had already been implemented for 6 weeks. And it was during a Zoom call that I asked repeatedly, when is this going to roll out? And the King County prosecutor refused to answer my question, and somebody from the executive staff finally answered it. So the issue is, now you talked about drug court. Drug court is a model. Domestic violence court, a model. You know what have you ever been to drug court when they have graduation, when people complete? It is an amazing thing. And when people, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, they are such difficult things for people to address. The key thing is that, and anybody who's been in one of those courtrooms will remember, there's this huge level of applause at the very end when somebody completes that program and they get their charge dismissed. So it's the accountability piece. What's critically missing right now, it's like there's a missing stool from a missing leg of a table, a missing leg of a stool, is that there is no judicial role in RCP right now. There is no check back in. It is, do not, you don't even get a case number, you don't get anything. You are just referred to a private organization, which has serious concerns in regard to transparency of money, public money that's being spent, and what happens with these cases and these offenders. So that's the critical difference. And people that go through drug court, it's heartwarming to see somebody have that level of accomplishment and complete. And when I ran domestic violence court, same thing, where they had, and domestic violence is obviously very complicated and very intertwined. And one of the things we did in that is made sure that we've really viewed the domestic violence court unit as homicide prevention and really trying to dismantle escalation of violence. And it's cases like that, you've got to make sure that you get them the treatment and accountability that's absolutely critical. But when you remove the accountability piece, then you've got real problems. Then you don't have a criminal justice system. You've got a referral to private agencies. The private agencies are doing great work, and we appreciate that. But there's got to be on the back end what we, as a community, we need to know: how are these funds being spent? What is actually expected of people? I've asked these questions repeatedly and have not received an answer. What are these programs? We don't know. Frankly, the judges don't know. So these cases, I used to say there's a bottom in the hole of the bucket. Well, actually, the bottom of the bucket is gone now. Now they're just referring cases to private organizations with nothing, no check back in. That's not justice, and you're not doing anybody any favors. You're looking the other way, and that's not what's going to happen. So I think that I think that with that program, you could remove 5 or 6 crimes off the list of eligible offenses. Would need to happen, and you need to add a judicial component. You do those 2 things, and I think the program could continue. I think the program is worthy, and we need to make sure that we're giving, especially young people, the ability to course correct meaningfully.
To the politics of this, you just got done with one campaign, jumping right into another. You just got reelected. You're kind of turning away a little bit from the city of Federal Way to focus on this campaign over the next 9-10 months.
Well, I really feel so strongly about this that when I was, it's been one of the great honors of my life to be the elected mayor of Federal Way, and I love it. But I really believe that our region is in crisis from a community, from a public safety standpoint, and I believe I'm uniquely qualified to address it. I really feel like it's my obligation to step up, not only because I have such vast experience and trial experience and criminal justice experience, but that my time there at the King County Prosecutor's Office was one in which I really developed a philosophy of helping people, holding people accountable. But I can't do my job as the mayor of the city of Federal Way with the violence that's occurring. You probably remember back right after I got reelected in November, in December, week after week after week, I'm on regional news, unfortunately, about the homicides and the shootings that were routinely occurring in Federal Way. When I approached the King County Prosecutor and some of the senior level people at the King County Prosecutor's Office and tried to reach out with my area mayors out in South King County and East King County, not only did we not receive the kind of information that we hope to receive in regard to partnership, they run in the other direction. And that's where we learned almost by accident about this RCP program, which was done. So I feel as a leader, as an elected leader of the city of Federal Way, I believe it's my solemn obligation to really stop the violence in this community and hold offenders accountable.
But what do you say to the voters that supported you, that elected you to another term, and 2 months into that term you're saying, I'm looking for another job?
Well, I'm looking to help them, and ultimately I think that the level of violence in the city of Federal Way is unacceptable. And the level of violence in South King County and East King County and downtown Seattle is unacceptable. I am honored by their support. It's one of the great honors of my life. But, John Lennon had a lyric that said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And no truer words were ever spoken. I certainly didn't expect this explosion of violence when I ran for a 3rd term as the mayor of Federal Way. I really didn't think we'd find ourselves in this situation in which the leadership of the King County Prosecutor's Office refuses to assist us. And I felt like it was my obligation to step up.
I mean, as prosecutor, you can only charge cases that have been referred by law enforcement.
That's correct. Right.
And you're ethically obligated not to charge unless you believe that you can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's right.
So are you looking to expand the role of prosecutor?
Well, I think that there's a really good point there, that there's been some sort of claim that somehow or another juvenile violence is down, or that's just absolutely not true and contrary to the evidence right before us. And so I would also say that, remember what I said earlier about the FADs, the filing and disposition standards? They have so greatly increased. That's why the South King County mayors actually were about to hold a press conference right before COVID hit to express our sincere alarm at what was happening at the prosecutor's office. And I said, no, let's not hold a press conference. Let's reach out to Dan and his staff. And we actually literally had meetings at the Tukwila Community Center with the leaders, the mayors and the police chiefs, to discuss our concerns. So I think you have control over filing and disposition standards. I also think, especially with, like, for an instance, with assault in the third degree against officers, that there's some sort of odd standard that has been created in regard to when you're going to file charges against officers. And then we've got, obviously, you're all aware of the fentanyl that's being smoked on buses and the drugs that are occurring in our community. I think what's happening right now is that I literally do not understand what our current elected prosecutor is thinking with regard to where is he at in Olympia with regard to the drug laws, with regard to the filing standards on assault threes, or the filing standards on all kinds of property crime. You need somebody that is much more, you need a prosecutor that leads and that will hold offenders accountable. And so I think that some of this is being done in regard to they jack up or increase the FADs, or these standards, to the point where they've told law enforcement, don't bring these to us.
But they file them all the time. I mean, I see possession of stolen vehicles, assault threes, both on police officers, transit workers.
Right.
They're filing those cases. Are you just saying that they're not filing enough of them?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I think really law enforcement is really, law enforcement is at its wit's end, and I really believe that that's why I'm so honored to have the endorsement of not only the King County Sheriff's Guild, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, the Federal Way Police, and there'll be many more. I believe law enforcement is unified in that they believe that there's an alarming trend in this region to not holding offenders accountable, and that makes everybody in the entire county unsafe. So, yeah, go ahead.
What's your approach to homelessness and encampments?
Well, what I would say is, you cannot allow. Seattle has deteriorated, and I think it has deteriorated to a point in which the social contract has broken down. I would encourage you to come to Federal Way, and you will not see a tent on public right-of-way, because it's not legal. It's not legal to camp in the right-of-way, and how this got tolerated, and then actually, it's the little things like graffiti. Next time you guys are aware of it. You drive on the freeway, you get off the Mercer Street Tunnel. It's horrible, and what it does is it creates this sense that we're going to tolerate this. And you have to, the leaders, the situation of the violence that was allowed and the illegality that was allowed at the King County Courthouse, in which jurors and people that worked there did not feel safe to walk in that building, is outrageous. And where was the King County prosecutor? Where was the executive? Where were the people standing up and saying, this is not acceptable? So what I would say is, graffiti, homelessness, you cannot have people set up tents on sidewalks. It's not legal. And it's not about, people say, well, where are they going to go? You have to be able to say, you cannot be here. It is a situation in which you cannot allow illegality to just go on. I frequently walk around Green Lake. Every opportunity, when I get up to Seattle, I try to walk around Green Lake. I went to the University of Washington. It was something I did all the time. I can't get my friends or my family to go around Green Lake anymore because of concern for their safety and the encampments that were there. And I think Mayor Harrell is going in the right direction to focus on this. But it's the graffiti, it's the homelessness, and that has to be addressed in a methodical manner.
So are you saying that you would charge someone who, say, was arrested for putting up a camp on a public right-of-way on a street?
I'm not necessarily saying that, no. And I think a lot of this is police enforcement, and I think, it would do no good to prosecute. It would do no good to prosecute people for that. I think a lot of this has to occur on a street level humanitarian manner. You just can't allow people to encamp on the sidewalk. But I'm not talking about prosecuting people for being homeless. And first of all, the Boise decision wouldn't allow that, and it's not humane and it's not right. So,
Well, you've had some solutions in federal way.
Right.
Like, how do you keep the streets clean if you're not prosecuting these cases or prosecuting these?
well, let me say this. That's a great question. Thank you for the follow-up on that and the opportunity. We have not prosecuted one person in federal way for being on a sidewalk in a right-of-way. But that's different from being able to enforce and have the police use their authority to be able to remove them off of, or diplomatically. Most people do, when told they can't stay there, when they have a referral of services, to be able to be moved along. But you just can't allow them to stay on the sidewalk. But that doesn't mean you have to prosecute them either. But I think that there is room in the law to be able to say we are not going to allow our society, and what we have essentially is a social compact to just allow the sidewalks to be littered with tents and people sleeping there. That's not legal. But I also, like I said, do not support prosecuting people for that. It's a proper law enforcement function to remove, essentially move people along from those situations. It may, but I think you need to make sure that we're working with our city partners and county partners to make sure they're a good referral of services.
Mayor Harrell this morning announced a new mobile unit downtown Seattle. King County a couple of weeks back announced
Right.
a new plan to provide individual social workers for every person who's living on the streets. What are your thoughts on these new plans? Is this the right direction?
It's absolutely the right direction, and I'm heartened to hear that from Mayor Harrell. I've known him for years. I'm a fan of his, and I think that's absolutely the right direction.
Mike, are you going to be able to answer some questions? With all respect, Mayor?
You bet.
Can I ask one more thing? Just out of it, bad week for crime, obviously downtown Seattle, not for you.
Okay.
Just what is you talk about all the numbers. Tell me what is one thing needs to happen now. What should the city do? What's the path?
Well, it's clear Mayor Hill understands that we need uniformed police officers. It's the police presence which provides the community feel safe. And right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're 500 police down because of the nonsensical defunding push in the past 2 years. And I think Mayor Harrell is recognizing that shortcoming decision by some current elected leaders, but there's a course correct, a significant pivot. Even President Biden said we need to fund the police. So there is a significant pivot, and the answer is I'm hearing from Mayor Harrell, and we fully support it, is the great people that represent SPOG right here in King County are in support of more funding and more cops, because I'm seriously concerned about, number one, the level of crime. As a community member, I'm worried about my own family's safety. And then, more importantly, we need more cops because of the working conditions, the safety concerns when they go to these emergent priority 1 calls, which are now pushing a 10-minute response time. How are they going to be safe? Do we have enough people to adequately back them up so they can properly protect the community that is demanding public safety issues get addressed? And I think Mayor Harrell is on the right path. He recognizes we need more cops. He just promised it the other day. We need to get back up to 1,400 cops. Right now, we're under 900. And if you're running a business, that's operating in the red. And that's not good for Seattle's public safety, nor King County.
What about people who've left, parted with the Department of King County Sheriff in Seattle because of vaccines? Is that something? What's the union's stance on that?
Yeah, I'm more focused on, number one, a main union's job is to protect jobs, period. And so, as the representative of the union, we fully support bringing people back that have been let go because of the vaccine mandate. And we're looking at least 40 people that could come back today if Mayor Harrell would reverse, course correct, pivot to allow those people to come back. And if you want to have masking and testing, by all means. But we have a demand to bargain on that, an unfair labor practice. So that's probably as much as I'm comfortable with in saying. But I would ask the mayor, if we're serious about staffing, getting us up to 1,400 cops, well, let's bring those other cops back who have been dismissed. What are we really valuing here? I think we're getting past COVID, and I'm not an expert on that. I think I'm an expert on the public safety issues and the cops that we represent as a union. What if we're pushing to get more cops because the community is demanding more uniformed police officers? I think it makes common sense as we're moving past COVID to bring those people back that are currently being dismissed. Doesn't make sense to me.
Like with everything going among your officers? It's a tough time right now, but it feels like the momentum is swinging as well. Where do your officers stand right now?
It's two parts, and I appreciate the question, Jonathan. The first part is they are demoralized because when you're targeted specifically as a human being just for being a police officer, that eats at your soul, it eats at your spirit. Where you become, if you hear that time and time again, that's echoed by the fringe activist groups that target you specifically for being a police officer, I can tell you as a human being, that has a deep psychological impact. And then when you're not supported by our elected officials, who sometimes carry that fringe activist talking point, then you're doubly punched in the gut. I'm seeing a glimmer of hope in Mayor Harrell to recognize that we need to support police and we get more police officers to protect this community. That gives us a positive course correct that we've typically seen politics immerse itself way too much in the public safety political discourse. What I'm hearing from the rank and file is that the officers are now seeing some hope where we have the political support to welcome a work environment that says, you know what, you as a police officer are valued. We recognize that, yes, you were the Department of Justice model of police reform not even 2 years ago. In fact, the past mayor, Mayor Durkin, ran a public relations campaign in a press conference such as this and remarked that this agency, the Seattle Police Department, was the modeled reformed agency for others to emulate. I find it hard to believe now, since we've lost 500 people, how can you now have that same talking point in terms of if you don't support the police, how are we going to get more people in here? We are indeed the modeled reformed agency. We lead it with accountability that is the model for others to emulate as well. We're the most accountable law enforcement agency in the United States of America, bar none. We're willing to sit down with the mayor, develop a new contract. We support accountability. We are indeed the model of reform. And anybody says otherwise aren't serious people.
So other agencies, pretty much rolled out the red carpet for SPD lateral transfers. And then we also had, a huge number of officers, kind of burn out their vacation time before doing retirement. So we've lost a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. And then from what I understand, for a new recruit, it can take up to 2 years for that person to be able to patrol alone. So, just getting funding for new officers doesn't fix the problem, right? This is a long road in terms of beefing up the Seattle Police Department.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I'm sorry, who are you with again?
I'm Sarah Jean Green with the Seattle
Sarah,
Police.
that's right. Thank you. I recognize your voice. Well, it goes to the point where Jonathan just made, and we talked about the morale issue. And for too long, there's been politicalization of public safety where police officers have been targeted just for being a police officer for wearing the uniform. And I'm seeing hope on the horizon where we have to recognize that police are needed. Our community is demanding more uniforms, and you need to have an atmosphere, as I mentioned earlier, that is a welcoming workplace feeling, if you will, just to be basic, that people are going to say, you know what, if I work for the Seattle Police Department, I'm going to be supported by that city. I'm going to get paid well, I'm going to be supported, or I can really do what my spirit wants me to do, and that's to provide service to people who I don't even know. We're willing to give our lives to complete strangers, even the ones that throw vile things at us. Being in this building not even 2 years ago, we were the target of multiple Molotov cocktail attacks. You need to now, we're seeing the pivot politically where the elected officials are recognizing the shortcomings of the defund movement, how short-sighted and naive that was, to now saying we need more cops and we need them fast. The problem is, as Seattle led the way along with Minneapolis and Portland of the defunding nonsense, we're competing with other national cities who are hurting for staffing, police staffing. So you need to have some type of positive narrative from an elected official office, such as the mayor, to say, you know what, you're going to get supported, you're going to get compensated, and we're going to take care of you so you can serve our community with respect and high honor. and be a part of the most accountable, progressive Seattle or police department in the nation. Thanks for the question, Sergi.
Well, it didn't really answer it. I mean, are you looking at a long road towards being able to get the scores back up to,
It's going to take 10 years at a minimum.
thank you.
10 years at a minimum.
Mike, would you like to mention and name the public officials who you claim are parroting these fringe talking points?
They know who they are, and I've mentioned them many times. You can follow my podcast, Hold the Line with Mike Solon, and our SeattlePoliceOfficers.com. They know who they are, and that's living in the past. And when I want to move forward and acknowledge the people that are elected by this populace to course correct the public safety crisis we're all in, fully supportive of that.
Mike, if I could ask one more question, if others here don't have another question for you. Look, you're now asking for more funding for police. You're asking for more officers on the street. With that said, what about the reforms? Do you believe that there need to be any reforms for SPD at this point?
Well, we're operating under the reforms that are currently being reformed at the state capitol. And as I mentioned earlier, the Seattle Police Department is the most progressive and accountable law enforcement agency in the United States of America. We're fully behind the accountability process. It's laid out in our contract. We look forward to the upcoming negotiations with the mayor's office and the city to get us to another contract. And we're very proud of the fact that the purveyor of constitutional policing, the Department of Justice, United States government, recognized this agency not even 2 years ago as being that modeled, reformed agency. I don't know any other entity outside of that profound department that is credible to say otherwise. So we're proud to work for the most accountable agency and the modeled reformed agency, and we will continue that work. And I applaud the men and women that are here today who continue that reform work, the accountability, through their work ethic.
Could you specifically tell us which reform law you're talking about in Olympia and how that's already impacted your officers to do their job?
I think Mayor Farrell already addressed that in terms of the pursuit policy, and then if you look at the less lethal launchers that ultimately removed a significant tool that allowed us to de-escalate situations with persons in crisis. They removed a tool from us to be able to do that successfully. And I think it played a hand in this latest loss of one of our police canine dogs. Number one, the lack of staffing. But we needed less lethal launchers there to assist us with trying to control a person in crisis. Sadly, because of the loss of so many officers, it took several prolonged minutes to get back up there. And I use that incident to further my talking point, is that people need to realize how detrimental defunding was to this agency. And tragedies result, and we're noticing the tragedies occurring in downtown where families don't even want to go downtown. We had a 15-year-old boy who was just shot. And as he lay on the ground, it didn't appear as if anybody was providing him aid. So we have a serious situation here, and we believe Mayor Farrell, hopefully the next King County prosecuting attorney, is going to course correct and lead us out of this public safety crisis. And I'm proud to support, on behalf of the Seattle Police Officers Guild and the King County Police Officers Guild, Jim Farrell for King County's next prosecuting attorney to help get us out of this big hole.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your presence.
And you can reach me at jimfarrell.org. And I can stick around for a few minutes if you guys have individual questions.